Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Joseph Hammer and I'm an assistant professor of counseling psychology at the University of Kentucky. And in today's video I wanted to spend some time talking about this idea that we have in counseling psychology that the personal is professional. And what that means is that how we carry ourselves as a person and how we feel about ourselves and act towards other people very much influences the professional work we do in the context of counseling psychology, whether we're practitioners or researchers or instructors or whatever our role is while we're in training and after we graduate. So one piece that I think about when it comes to the personal as professional is how ourselves as people shows up in the therapy room with clients. So when you're sitting down across from a client who's come to you because they're depressed or anxious or grieving a loss of some kind or having relationship troubles, what they're really wanting, among other things, is to really feel heard and understood by their counselor. And the empathetic attunement we have, how connected we are to the emotions of the client and the story that they're laying at our feet, that's very much influenced by our ability to listen and understand, empathize, and react to the person. And that's a skill that we tend to carry with us wherever we go in life. So if I'm talking with a friend or talking with my partner, I'm always listening to what they have to say, and I'm showing them in certain ways that I'm following what they're saying, understanding, resonating with certain parts of their story, or empathizing with happy or annoying or distressing parts of what they're talking about. And that's shown in my interpersonal abilities and my warmth and my caringness and my attention to them. And those are very personal qualities that come out in those relationships. And those are the same ingredients that we use in the therapy session to grow closer to our clients, to show them that, hey, you can trust me, I care about what you have to say, I'm on your side, I'm in your corner, and I get what you're saying. I can see how that would be so painful or so frustrating or so alienating. So these skills, these interpersonal skills that we have developed to some extent over the course of our lives just through our daily interactions with family members and friends and mentors, those are the same skills that we use to build a relationship therapeutically with our clients in the room. So that's one piece when we talk about how the personal is professional, that it's those basic listening skills that we use in both contexts. Another piece around how the personal is professional is that we are ourselves even in the therapy room. And that means that the things that get us really excited or that we get really stressed out about or weirded out about or skittish around are the same things in the therapy session. So if we grew up in a cultural context in a family where talking about emotions, particularly negative emotions or vulnerable emotions like sadness or fear, wasn't accepted, that there were implicit or maybe even explicit messages of, hey, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or don't cry, or it's okay, things are fine, or don't express anger towards me, messages like that we've internalized over time, then we walk around with this voice, this set of rules in the back of our head that says, this is how I approach or don't approach my own emotional experience. And so I know for me, particularly being a white male, one of the ways that I've been socialized in my family and elsewhere was to try and be stoic generally. So to be tough, to not let difficult emotions get to me or impact me. I was supposed to kind of be a strong rock in the storm and weather through that no matter what. Not show weakness because people would make fun of me or not respect me. Not show sadness. Not a lot of times apologize when it was really my fault that I did something, because that would put me in a position of weakness. And as a part of that stoicism, it also made it hard to really take off the armor and open up to somebody else, to say things like, hey, Henry, I really appreciate our friendship. Like I really feel close to you. I like the good times that we have. Just expressing appreciation for a friendship like that. That's a no-no. That's too kind of vulnerable, too intimate. You're not supposed to talk about those sorts of things. You might think them in the back of your head, but you don't speak to that. That's just a little too vulnerable. If you say that and the other person doesn't receive that or respect that or reciprocate that, you could get hurt. You could get embarrassed. You could be rejected, basically, and that would hurt. So for me, that the priority of that stoicism certainly played out, particularly early on in the therapy I started to provide to clients as a graduate student under supervision. I noticed that when the client and I would be talking and they started talking about really sad or vulnerable things, that voice, that socialized voice in me would be like, oh, this is okay, we're getting into tricky territory. I don't feel that comfortable talking about this stuff. I don't talk about this stuff a lot with people, so how am I going to help this person work with that stuff? It's kind of hard for me to sit with this client as they're here. And I wasn't necessarily consciously aware of that cognitive and emotional process going on for me. So it was more of this stuff was operating implicitly, and it would manifest itself in sometimes subtle ways in how I was providing my therapy in the room. So, for example, if a client would bring up tender emotions or would start to tear up a little bit, instead of noticing that, pursuing that, and bringing that to the attention of the client and helping them deepen that, if that was the therapeutically appropriate thing to do, which a lot of times it is, I would hesitate to do that. I would just kind of sit there and hear them out, but I didn't feel ready and excited to help deepen that, and it was harder for me to know how to do that, because that was never something I was really taught as a human growing up. That wasn't the role I played in my family or my social contexts. So I'd find myself kind of staying away or not helping the client stick with or deepen those emotional experiences, because that was my stuff. That was a reflection of my own socialization and what I felt was comfortable and appropriate for me based on how I had been raised. And of course, I do believe that good therapeutic work often requires helping us guide our clients towards the difficult and powerful emotion that's connected to their suffering, and helping them process that, sit with that, deepen that, intensify that. Sometimes, not always. There are caveats around trauma work and other things like that, but a lot of times I think the best work and the most therapeutic change for a client can happen when we help them do that. And that was hard for me. That wasn't natural for me as a therapist, particularly earlier on. So this personal life, this personal side of me showed up in the professional realm in terms of how I worked with clients. In terms of other personal, professional things, my personal cultural identities very much influenced how I interacted with clients who had similar demographic backgrounds and different demographic backgrounds than myself. So for me, I self-identifying as a white heterosexual male from a middle upper class background, these pieces of my identity have very much shaped how I've been taught to see the world and how people have treated me over the course of my life and the messages they've taught me. So I already spoke a little bit about how the male part of me, that because I present to the world as a male, that people automatically have certain expectations of me or certain rules and guidelines for me, and so they'll treat me in a certain ways that kind of puts me in that gender box where they'll expect me to be tougher, strong, to expect that I like to play sports, and expect that I'm attracted to women, kind of a heterosexual assumption, and just many other expectations for how they think I should behave or how men are supposed to behave or typically behave. So in addition to that, in terms of the whiteness part of my identity, one of the messages that I consistently got over the course of my life is that, Joe, if you put in the good work, if you work hard enough, you will always succeed, because the world is a level playing field for you. People will give you a chance, and if you work hard, you will be given a seat at the table. It's just all about effort and work ethic. And if you fail, that means because you didn't try hard enough, or you weren't smart enough, or hardworking enough. So it's kind of this idea of meritocracy, that the only thing that matters is your merit, your efforts, your intelligence. And so I always got messages from teachers and coaches and my family members and the people around me that they expected me to work hard, and they genuinely thought I would succeed and that I was capable of doing that. And of course, there are many different identity pieces that could influence somebody to send messages like that to me, but my whiteness is a big part, is that I've just grown up expecting that life will be good to me. And certainly things like my higher socioeconomic status, my higher income and wealth, is very much influential in that, because I know from having heard the words of white folks who have lesser means that that's not a message that they got, that because of their lower wealth they haven't necessarily had the same sort of opportunities or messages or perception that the world is their oyster, or that there aren't any barriers and it's just about hard work. They've told me that they've felt kind of stuck where they're at. So there's a lot of things that can influence that, but I think something consistent is that in general, at least in our country, white folks tend to have the message that if you work hard, you'll have an equal shot at success. And that's really all it takes. Whereas in having talked with people of color who have been my clinical supervisors and colleagues over time, I didn't know this earlier on in my life, but in having conversations with them, they shared with me, and they said, Joe, it's really interesting to hear that you feel like, if you just work hard, you'll succeed, and that's kind of the expectation. They said, that hasn't been my experience at all. They said, I got the message that people didn't expect me to succeed or do well, and people thought it was silly if I was going to expect that the world should treat me fairly, and they're like, that's not how it works. You'll learn that pretty quick. And some people of color also got the messages that they weren't necessarily expected to even be able to live a long life and make it past their 20s, depending on the neighborhoods in which they lived and the risk factors that were in place. And that's a thought that's never crossed my mind. I've always been in the context of safe neighborhoods and have always had resources provided to me to help me succeed. And so it was really, really difficult for me to sit with that idea that, wow, it's not the case that everybody has been told and supported that, hey, you can go out there and you can get it, and stuff is equal, you just got to work hard. That's not been other people's reality. It's really unfair. And that's a deeply personal thing. And so what's interesting about that is that we all walk around with assumptions about stuff like this. And so I had these assumptions for a long time. And so that means that when I would walk into the therapy room and I'd sit down with a client, maybe this was a black male client, if I wasn't aware that these are assumptions that are grounded in my own whiteness and other aspects of my identity, and I would just kind of implicitly assume that this person's lived reality is the same as mine, I might interpret some of the things they say or some of the barriers they talk about or the struggles they have in a different way, in an inaccurate way, because I would be assuming that they've been given all the privileges and the opportunities that I have my whole life. And I wouldn't necessarily be aware that people were constantly doubting this client's ability to succeed or chances of success, or that they were not told that you have a right to a voice, or that you should be heard, or that your lived experience as a black man matters in this country. I might be totally oblivious to that. And so what is at risk there is I can microaggress against my client. That's a term you may have heard at some point already, in terms of these subtle slights and insults that can be directed towards people who are in marginalized groups by people who tend to have more power in society, such as myself. So it can be little things that communicate that the person speaking does not understand this other person's experience, and basically communicates that you are a lesser person, or that your ways or your cultural facets are weird or different than the norm, i.e. like the white typical norm. So it can be, an example of a microaggression is, and this could be directed at, say, a black woman. Oh, like you're so articulate. And if you said that comment to the average white person, that might feel like a compliment. Oh, thank you. But given our cultural context in this country, given the stereotypes that have been continuously reinforced over time, that black people are inarticulate, or that they're not smart, or that they won't succeed, or they won't work hard, or they cannot speak well. These inaccurate, negative, damaging stereotypes that are saturated in the media and in people's minds. Like, we all have grown up in this country where we get these messages from all different corners. We're not necessarily aware of it. So I've been exposed to these inaccurate stereotypes my whole life about black people in particular. And so because that socialized stuff is in my brain floating around somewhere, even though as a person who values equality and justice, those are not stereotypes that I agree with. I think they're absolute crap. They still have kind of infested my brain over time, and that is the case for all of us in this country. More privileged people, more marginalized people, we're all exposed to these messages, and they've kind of settled into our long-term memories in some ways and can influence the associations and the thoughts we have about a given person that we see. And then that can influence our behavior in negative ways. So to bring us back, I might not be aware of the lived experience of this black male client that I'm working with, and some of these subtle stereotypes that are operating for me might influence how I treat this person, and might lead me to maybe pathologize them, to interpret their situation as indicating a lack of effort or a lack of goodness on their part. Like, oh, you talk about being stressed and feeling like you've been rejected and not accepted by a lot of your classmates on campus. And I might say, well, I might be thinking, well, you know, what's wrong with this person's social skills? Why can't they seem to connect? It must be something they're doing wrong. And I might be oblivious to the very real fact that because we all hold these negative stereotypes and they can influence our behavior, it's very possible that, say for this black male client, that the white students around him on campus and how they interact with him might be more distancing, might show clearly in their mannerisms and their behavior that I'm not comfortable with you, or I don't like you, or I don't want to hang out with you, I don't want to talk to you. You know, you don't have to say something explicitly out loud. Discrimination is not just in the form of overt, clear racial slurs. These more subtle microaggressions themselves are quite frequent and quite powerful still in our country. And it's tough because we have, I think, trouble acknowledging that reality. But they're very much still a part of the fabric of our culture, including on college campuses. And so I have to, as a counselor, particularly as a white male counselor, be aware that this can be the real lived experience of a black client like this, and that I should not be jumping to, oh, what's wrong with your social skills, when it's very possible that the people around him are genuinely treating him poorly as a second-class citizen and not giving him a chance to connect with them. So this is bringing us back to our larger theme, the personal is professional. These personal socialization experiences around my identities and the messages that society has fed me and all of us about people from different racial ethnic groups, from different sexual orientations, religious backgrounds, and all these other forms of identity. These messages can get into our brains and subtly influence how we think, feel, and behave. And if we're not aware that that's happening, because it's always happening to some degree, when we're not aware of it, it's going to influence our behavior and we won't even know. We might end up treating someone unjustly to some degree because this is operating and we're not aware of it and trying to adjust and fight that internalized set of negative stereotypes that we hold. So as counselors, and particularly as counseling psychologists, one of the things that most of our programs in counseling psychology emphasize is starting to become more aware of ourselves as cultural beings, and how the privileges that come with certain of our identities, or the marginalizations and lack of power that come with more marginalized sides of our identity, how these influence our lived experience and how we've come to view the world and ourselves and our chances in life, and how we view those people around us who are similar or different than ourselves. And as part of our graduate training, we become more aware of the stuff we walk around with, and we start to get a better sense of how this operates for us and how we can mindfully counteract when those stereotypes might start popping up into our brain and wanting to subtly influence our behavior. So by practicing an awareness of this stuff and adjusting as we need to counteract those forces, we can then treat the people around us, including the clients who we work with, in a more equitable manner. So another way in which this very personal part of our experience shows up in the professional realm. So there are many more countless examples of how the personal is professional, but those are, I think, a nice diverse set of examples that highlight this piece. So I think this is probably a good place to close out this discussion. And I guess in closing, I'm curious what it's like for you to hear this from me. Maybe for some of you watching, this is a familiar idea and you're like, yeah, duh, I know this, you're not telling me anything interesting, which is great. That means you if you learned a lot of important stuff and you're on that journey. And for some of you, this may seem really strange and weird the first time you've heard it, and that's okay too. This is one of the central things that you will get to experience self-growth around if you pursue master's and or doctoral education in counseling psychology, because it's one of those pieces that we really value and that we think helps create a really good clinician, instructor, professor, supervisor in counseling psych. So if it all sounds interesting to you and kind of intriguing and meaningful and important, that's a great sign that potentially this sort of counseling psych training could be a good fit for you if you're thinking about maybe going in that direction, or maybe you're a current grad student in the helping professions or in counseling psych and you maybe heard about this concept of personal as professional, but it hadn't really been fleshed out as much for you. So I hope maybe some of these examples can help give some color or some explanation to that. So yeah, thank you for watching and tuning in to this part, and please do consider checking out my other videos on various topics, including how to prepare yourself to be a great candidate for getting into counseling psych PhD programs. I have a multi-part series on that I think has some really key advice that might be really valuable for you if you're looking to potentially go into master's or doc programs in counseling psych or other mental health professions. So I encourage you to check those out. And thanks for watching, and I always mention that if there's any particular topic related to counseling psych or research or clinical practice or graduate school or whatever that's related to the stuff I might know about, shoot me an email. My email's on my faculty page website. Shoot me an email and let me know what you'd love to see me speak to for 5 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever. And I'll definitely consider that request, because I'd love to post more of these kind of off-the-cuff discussions. So yeah, thanks for tuning in and have a great day.